The phone call came late on a Thursday evening, slicing through the quiet hum of my duplex like an alarm. I had just sat down with a glass of wine, sinking into the small victory of balancing bills and seeing, for once, that I wasn't scraping by my sanctuary. The side of the duplex I claimed as my own was finally starting to feel like a home, not just another stop along life's uncertain path. That's when my mother's voice, sharp with forced cheer, told me she needed me at a family meeting. No details, just urgency. A chill settled in my chest. Family meetings in our house were never casual. They were verdicts dressed as conversations, pronouncements disguised as discussions. I drove across town with a growing knot in my stomach, rehearsing possibilities. Maybe someone was sick, maybe a new will arrangement, maybe Dad had finally decided to retire. But nothing prepared me for the words that greeted me when I stepped into the living room. My parents sat together on the couch, perched like judges on a bench. My brother lounged in an armchair with his wife by his side, their 3 children, already turning the floor into a battlefield of plastic toys. The air was thick with expectation. Mom clasped her hands together, her eyes darting to me as if to soften the blow. "We've all been talking," she began, her tone saccharine, rehearsed. "And we've decided it's time to make some changes. Your brother and his family are going to move into your duplex. It'll be temporary, of course. They need space, and it's perfect for them." She smiled as if she had just announced a family vacation. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Move into my duplex?" I repeated slowly, searching for clarity. "Yes," Mom said, her tone firming as though my hesitation were unreasonable. "Into your side. They'll have room for the kids, and it makes sense, doesn't it? Family helping family." My brother's grin stretched smug across his face, as if this had been settled long before I arrived. His wife looked relieved, like a burden had already been lifted. My parents leaned in, waiting for my response, the weight of their expectation crushing the silence between us, and then the words that truly gutted me. "Of course they won't pay rent. You wouldn't charge family, would you?" For a moment, the world went muffled, my ears ringing with the echo of "for free." My chest tightened, not just with anger but with disbelief. This duplex was more than 4 walls and a mortgage. It was my escape hatch, my anchor. I had fought for it, scrimping, denying myself dinners out, vacations, even a reliable car, to make the down payment. I had signed every dotted line with the promise that this property would be my security, my independence. And now, with a few casual words, my parents were carving into it, as though my work and sacrifice belonged not to me, but to the family collective. I tried to swallow, but my throat burned. "You're saying they're moving in, just like that, without rent?" My voice was steadier than I felt, though my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Dad finally spoke, his voice calm, almost bored, as if I were asking questions with obvious answers. "It's not a big deal. You're single. You don't need all that space. They've got 3 kids. It's only fair." Fair. The word struck me like a slap. Fair, in their eyes, was stripping away what I had built to patch the holes in my brother's life. Fair was equating my independence with his chaos and then tipping the scales in his favor. Fair was deciding for me, not with me. I looked at my brother. He didn't even bother to defend the arrangement. He only shrugged, as if my silence already counted as consent. His wife squeezed his hand, her relief palpable, her gaze sliding past me as if I were merely an obstacle to be managed, not a person with rights or choices. I wanted to shout, to scream that this wasn't theirs to give away, but my voice caught in my chest. The weight of family loyalty pressed down like a chain. They had framed the decision as love, as generosity, as obligation, all tools designed to silence me. Instead, I stared at my parents, my pulse pounding so loudly I could hear it. I thought of my duplex, the evenings spent painting the walls, fixing the plumbing myself, planting the little garden in back with the stubborn hope that roots meant permanence. I thought of my tenants next door, the rent checks that kept my head above water, the nights I'd gone to sleep exhausted but proud that I was finally standing on my own. And I realized, with a nauseating twist in my gut, that none of it mattered. To them, to my family, my independence was negotiable. My home was theirs to reassign. My voice, unless it agreed with theirs, was irrelevant. The room buzzed with chatter as Mom went on about how the kids would love the space, how it would be so good for everyone. My father nodded, my brother smirked, and my sister-in-law already spoke about where she'd put the crib. They had moved on, assuming I was conquered, my silence mistaken for acceptance. But beneath my stillness, something flared. A quiet, simmering fire that whispered this was not over. That my duplex, my life, was not theirs to claim. That their announcement was not a decree, but the opening shot of a battle they didn't even realize they had started. And as I sat there, surrounded by family who spoke of my home as if it were already theirs, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. Everything was about to change. The first week after the announcement stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement wouldn't be as catastrophic as my gut warned. I told myself it was temporary, that family solidarity had to mean something, and that perhaps I could survive the intrusion as long as boundaries were kept. But even as I clung to these thoughts, a dark, nagging suspicion whispered that I was lying to myself. It didn't take long for my suspicions to bear fruit. My brother and his family wanted to test out the unit, just for a weekend, they said, so the kids can get comfortable, my sister-in-law added with a smile that was equal parts apology and assumption. Against my better judgment, I agreed. After all, what was 2 days to prove that this could be manageable. But when I walked into the unit after their so-called trial run, my heart sank into my stomach. The living room, which I had painstakingly painted a warm, neutral cream, was now buried beneath a battlefield of toys. Plastic dinosaurs and tiny trucks covered every inch of the carpet. Sticky fingerprints streaked the freshly cleaned walls. The kitchen sink overflowed with dishes, greasy pans stacked precariously, and a smell of stale food wafted out like a warning sign. My neatly folded curtains were yanked halfway down, as though they'd been used as a climbing rope. I stood there in disbelief, my eyes darting across the wreckage. The duplex had never looked like this, not even on my worst days. I had treated it with respect, because it wasn't just a house, it was my investment, my responsibility, my future. Yet in 48 hours, my brother's family had managed to reduce it to something resembling a college dorm after a week-long party. The first blow came when my tenants from the other side of the duplex knocked on my door that evening. Mr. and Mrs. Calder, a quiet couple in their 50s, looked both uncomfortable and exhausted. They hesitated before speaking, but finally Mrs. Calder admitted, "We didn't want to bother you, but the noise this weekend, it was unbearable." She described stomping feet, screaming matches over toys, the television blaring at midnight, and the children racing through the halls as if the place were an indoor playground. Embarrassment flooded me. I had promised the Calders peace when they signed their lease, and now I could see the doubt in their eyes, the silent question. Had I betrayed that promise? I assured them it was temporary, that I would take care of it. They nodded politely, but the disappointment in their expressions told me they weren't convinced. That night, I called my brother to address what I thought could be solved with reason. I laid out the mess, the noise, the tenants' complaints, and my expectations. For basic respect, if they were going to stay. His response? A laugh. Not the nervous kind, not the conciliatory kind, but a laugh so dismissive it made my skin crawl. "Relax," he said, his voice laced with condescension. "Kids are messy. Houses get messy. It's not a big deal. The tenants will get used to it. You need to stop being so uptight." His words hit me like a slap, each one dripping with the certainty that I had no right to object. He didn't even acknowledge that the duplex belonged to me, that I was the one cleaning up after their chaos. In his mind, it was already his space, and I was merely the gatekeeper, too foolish to realize I'd been pushed aside. The following day, I brought it up with my parents, hoping for some semblance of support. I described the mess, the complaints, the lack of respect. But instead of outrage, I was met with thinly veiled irritation. "You're blowing this out of proportion," Mom said, her tone sharp. "You've never had kids, so you just don't understand. A home with children isn't meant to be spotless. They need space to play, to grow. You should be more flexible." Dad chimed in, his voice carrying that edge of disappointment that had always cut me deeper than anger. "Your brother's doing his best. He's got responsibilities you'll never understand. You live alone, you don't know what it means to provide for a family. They need that unit more than you need to. Control it." The message was clear. Because I didn't have children, because I had chosen a life on my own, my needs were invisible, my sacrifices irrelevant. It wasn't generosity they expected, it was obedience. I drove home that night with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I replayed the conversations again and again, hearing the dismissive laughter, the sharp tones, the unspoken accusation that I was selfish. But what gnawed at me most was the realization that this wasn't about temporary help. It wasn't about family pulling together in hard times. No, this was about control, about rewriting ownership, reshaping my independence into something they could claim for themselves. In the quiet of my duplex, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the mortgage documents I kept neatly filed in a drawer. My name was printed on every page, proof of the nights I had sacrificed sleep to work extra shifts, the vacations I had denied myself, the countless small luxuries I had forfeited to make this place mine. Yet in the eyes of my family, those sacrifices meant nothing. My efforts were not honored but erased, overridden by their belief that my life was negotiable. The cracks in the plan were no longer just visible, they were widening, splintering into fractures I knew could not be ignored. Something inside me hardened that night, a steel resolve forged out of the wreckage of my family's expectations. If they thought my silence would mean surrender, they were wrong. The battle lines were beginning to form, though none of them realized it yet. And as I looked around at the quiet, orderly side of my duplex, the side that still belonged entirely to me, I whispered a promise to myself. I would not let them take this from me, not without a fight. The tension had simmered long enough. After days of replaying every conversation, every dismissive laugh, and every sharp-edged word my parents had spoken, I reached the point where silence became its own kind of betrayal of myself. I could no longer stand by and let the narrative spin out of control, as though my duplex were a family heirloom up for redistribution, rather than a property I had fought tooth and nail to secure. If my family wanted to force the issue, then I would respond the only way I knew how, with boundaries. I invited them all over on a Sunday afternoon, choosing the dining room table as the battlefield. The duplex's kitchen was spotless, polished, to a shine that reflected not only my fastidiousness, but also my resolve. I had placed a folder in the center of the table, its contents simple yet powerful, a lease agreement I had drafted. It wasn't harsh, not unreasonable, just fair. A discounted rent, written responsibilities, a clear timeline. Terms that would protect me as a landlord, yet still acknowledge the blood ties they held so dear. When they arrived, the air was already thick. My brother strode in with the confidence of someone who believed the deal was already sealed. His wife followed, tight-lipped, as though she expected confrontation but had no intention of participating in it. My parents trailed behind, carrying that same blend of resignation and authority that made it clear they were prepared to referee, but only on my brother's side. I didn't waste time. I've thought about everything we discussed, I began, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. If you want to stay in the duplex, we'll need to formalize things. I've drawn up a lease. It's heavily discounted, but it ensures accountability for both of us. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. My brother's expression darkened immediately, his mouth twisting into a sneer. He slapped the folder shut without even reading it. Are you serious? He demanded, his voice rising. You're putting money over family? Over your own niece and nephews? That's disgusting. His wife let out a sharp exhale, muttering, unbelievable, under her breath. I met his glare, refusing to flinch. This isn't about money. It's about respect. This is my home, my property. If you're going to live here, even temporarily, there have to be rules. It protects us both. But he was already on the attack. You don't get it. Family doesn't nickel and dime each other. Family steps up when one of them is struggling. Or do you like watching us drown while you sit here in your cozy little half of the duplex, acting like a queen? The insult landed, sharp and deliberate. My parents shifted in their seats, and I waited, just for a flicker of support, a sign that they understood my side. Instead, Mom leaned forward, her voice trembling with disappointment. Honey, we raised you to value family above all else. This lease, it feels cold. You're treating your brother like a stranger. Dad added the final blow, his voice low and grave. You're breaking apart the family bond over a piece of paper. Do you want to be remembered as the one who drove a wedge between us? The accusations poured over me like icy water. For a moment, I wanted to shrink, to retreat back into silence, to appease them the way I had so many times before. but something inside me refused to bend. Their words weren't just manipulations, they were shackles, forged to keep me obedient. And I was done wearing them. I straightened in my chair, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "I will always be there for emergencies," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "But this duplex is not up for negotiation. It's mine. If you want to live here, you sign the lease. If not, then the answer is no." The room erupted. My brother shot to his feet, pacing like a caged animal. "You're unbelievable. You'd rather side with strangers, the Calders, your precious tenants, than your own blood. You're pathetic." His wife clutched his arm, whispering for him to calm down, but her eyes burned with equal fury. My parents sat in stony silence, their disappointment palpable. The silence was worse than yelling, it carried the weight of exile, the suggestion that by standing my ground, I had betrayed them. For days after that confrontation, the silence lingered like a storm cloud. Calls went unanswered, family group texts turned eerily quiet. Even when I stopped by my parents' house, the warmth that once defined our home had curdled into cold civility. The weight of their judgment pressed heavily, yet beneath it all, a strange sense of relief began to grow. For the first time, I had drawn a line they could not cross. My brother's fury, my parents' disapproval, these were the prices of independence, and though they cut deeply, they also affirmed something I had long forgotten. I had the right to protect what was mine. Still, the fracture was undeniable. In the days that followed, I heard through cousins and distant relatives that my brother had been telling his own version of the story, that I was selfish, greedy, cruel, that I had abandoned family values in favor of cold contracts. Whispers spread like wildfire, painting me as the villain in a narrative I never asked to be part of. Yet even as the rumors grew, so did my resolve. Boundaries were meant to be tested, but they were also meant to hold. And though the silence between us grew thicker, though the distance stretched further, I clung to the knowledge that I had finally spoken for myself. The battle lines were no longer invisible. They were carved deep into the fabric of our family, raw and unhealed. And I knew the fight was only beginning. The silence between my family and me stretched for weeks, brittle and sharp, like glass ready to shatter. Every phone call from my parents went unanswered. Every text from my brother was a short, clipped demand, often left ignored. I tried to bury myself in routine work, bills, tending to the small garden behind my duplex, but underneath, I felt the fracture widening. It wasn't just about the duplex anymore. It was about something deeper, a pattern that had always been there but which I had refused to see. It was on a rainy evening, when I least expected it, that the truth slipped free. I had stopped by my parents' house after Mom insisted on talking things out. Her voice over the phone had carried that familiar thread of guilt, tugging at me until I gave in. The house smelled the same as always, stew simmering in the kitchen, lemon polish on the furniture, but the air felt heavier, tense. We sat in the living room, my mother across from me, wringing her hands, while my father watched me with the kind of steady gaze that always made me feel 12 years old again, waiting for a lecture. For a few minutes, Mom tried softening the conversation with talk of family dinners and how the children missed me, but the weight of what lay unsaid hung between us until finally Dad leaned forward. "We always assumed," he said in a voice that was calm, almost casual, "that you'd let your brother live there for free. Unless, of course, you planned to sell the duplex to him one day." The words landed like a hammer blow. Unless. My entire body went cold. In that single moment, the fog lifted, and I saw everything with horrifying clarity. This had never been about temporary housing or family helping family. It had been about funneling what was mine into my brother's hands, about ensuring that even my achievements, even my independence, ultimately served him. I stared at my father, searching for any sign of a joke, of irony, but his expression was unreadable, his gaze steady. He meant every word. My mother looked away, as though she couldn't bear to meet my eyes, confirming the collusion. "So that's what this is about," I said finally, my voice breaking the silence like glass shattering. "You don't see this as mine at all. You see it as his. My work, my money, my sacrifices, they were just placeholders until he was ready to take them." Mom flinched, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Don't twist it like that. We only want what's best for everyone. Your brother has a family. He has responsibilities." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "You're more flexible." Flexible. The word was acid in my ears. Flexible meant disposable. It meant that because I hadn't married or had children, because I lived alone, my accomplishments were somehow worth less. It meant that all those years of clawing my way toward stability were, in their eyes, just another safety net for my brother to fall into. I rose from my chair, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and betrayal. You're not asking me to help him. You're telling me my future doesn't matter, that everything I've built is just waiting for him to claim. Is that what family means to you? Dad's expression hardened. Don't be dramatic. We're not taking anything from you. We just thought you'd do the right thing. Unless, of course, you're holding onto that duplex for selfish reasons. The word selfish cut through me, sharp and deliberate. It was the weapon they always wielded when I refused to fall in line. Selfish for wanting to protect what was mine. Selfish for not handing over years of sacrifice without a second thought. I laughed on a sound that startled even me. It was bitter, raw, tinged with the kind of clarity that comes only when illusions finally break. Selfish? You call me selfish while you plot to erase me from my own life? You want me to disappear, to hand everything over, and smile while doing it. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I could no longer tell if they were from sorrow or from anger at my defiance. She whispered, "Why can't you just put family first?" Because family doesn't mean erasing yourself. I shot back. Family doesn't mean sacrificing your entire future to someone else's mistakes. Family doesn't mean rewriting ownership so your golden son never has to face the consequences of his choices. The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. For the first time, I saw my parents not as protectors, not as the people who had raised me, but as architects of a system that had always tilted against me. My brother's needs had always come first, his failures cushioned, his missteps excused, his responsibilities shifted onto others. And I had been complicit, letting it slide, convincing myself it was love. But now, with my duplex on the line, I could see the pattern for what it was: control. I left their house that night with my father's words echoing in my mind, "Unless you plan to sell the duplex to him one day." It was not just a suggestion. It was an expectation, a prophecy they intended to fulfill. And in their eyes, my refusal would mark me not only as selfish but as a traitor to the family itself. The rain was still falling when I stepped outside, but I barely felt it. The truth had cut deeper than any storm could. My duplex wasn't just a building, it was a battlefield. And now, I knew the fight wasn't about rent or leases, or even noise complaints. It was about ownership. About my right to exist as more than just a supporting character in my brother's story. As I drove home, headlights slicing through the wet darkness, I whispered the vow I had made once before, but now with a clarity that seared through every doubt. They will not take this from me, not through guilt, not through manipulation, not even through blood. If they wanted a war, they had just declared it. The night after my father revealed the "unless" clause, I sat alone in my half of the duplex, the deed spread out on the kitchen table like a relic of war. The paper was crisp, the ink faded in places from handling, but the name scrawled across it was mine. Mine. Every line of that document represented sleepless nights, double shifts, and 1,000 small sacrifices no one had seen, no one had praised. My family could dismiss it, could belittle it, but they could not erase it. Not unless I let them. The silence in the duplex was comforting, almost holy, compared to the noise of my family's demands. I ran my fingertips over the embossed seal, reminding myself that this was more than property, it was identity. It was proof I had carved something out of life without leaning on anyone, without waiting for handouts, without being told I didn't deserve it. The rain pattered against the windows, steady and relentless, like a heartbeat echoing the resolve building inside me. By morning, I knew what I had to do. My brother, my parents, everyone needed to hear the words from me directly. No more evasions, no more thinking about it, no more giving them time to twist my silence into consent. I sent the message. We would meet at my duplex that afternoon. Their replies were short, clipped, but they came. When they arrived, the tension in the air was thicker than ever. My brother marched in first, his wife trailing behind, both of them wearing the weary, irritated expressions of people inconvenienced by having to explain themselves. My parents followed, their faces hard masks of disappointment, as though they were the ones being wronged. The air smelled faintly of rain and brewing conflict. I didn't invite them to sit. Instead, I stood by the kitchen table where the deed lay in plain sight, and behind it, the folder with the lease agreement. My heart raced, but my voice was steady when I spoke. This is my home, I said, gesturing to the walls around us. This duplex is mine. I bought it. I sacrificed for it. I keep it running. It is not a gift to hand out, and it's not a placeholder until someone else decides to claim it, my brother scoffed, rolling his eyes. We've been over this. You're blowing it out of proportion. We just need some help. And I cut him off. No, you're not listening. I'll always help family in an emergency. If you were truly on the street, if your kids were in danger, I would never turn you away. But that's not what this is. You want to move in permanently, for free, as though this is already yours. That ends today. If you want to live here, you sign a lease. You pay rent, even at a discount. You treat this place with respect. If you can't agree to that, then this duplex isn't an option. The silence that followed was suffocating. My brother's jaw clenched as his wife whispered something sharp under her breath. My parents exchanged glances, their disappointment as heavy as a storm cloud. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low and deliberate. So this is it? You'd rather tear the family apart than show some generosity? I held his gaze. For the first time, I didn't shrink under it. No, I said softly, this isn't about tearing the family apart. This is about not tearing myself apart for the sake of everyone else. You raised me to work hard, to stand on my own 2 feet. That's what I've done. And now, I'm standing. My brother laughed bitterly. You're going to regret this when you're alone and no one wants anything to do with you. The words stung, but not in the way he intended. They were familiar, recycled threats from a family that had always expected my obedience. I breathed in slowly, let the sting fade, and replied, I'd rather be alone in my own home than surrounded by people who only see me as a resource to exploit. For the first time, there was no comeback, no counter-argument, just silence. My brother's glare faltered, my mother's tears welled but didn't fall, my father's eyes hardened into stone. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Freedom. The confrontation didn't end with hugs or reconciliation. My brother stormed out first, muttering curses under his breath. His wife followed, her eyes sharp daggers aimed at me. My parents lingered a moment longer, as if waiting for me to cave, to backtrack, to beg for forgiveness. But when they saw I wouldn't, they left too, their footsteps heavy with unspoken judgment. When the door closed, the duplex was quiet again, and the quiet this time was triumphant. The walls no longer felt like they were closing in under the weight of expectations. They felt like mine again, solid and unshakable. The deed still lay on the table, its edges illuminated by the afternoon light streaming through the window. I picked it up, folded it carefully, and slid it back into its folder, tucking it away in its rightful place. I didn't fool myself into thinking the battle was truly over. My family would nurse their grudges, spread their stories, paint me as the villain in their version of events. But for the first time, their narratives no longer defined me. I had spoken, drawn the line, and refused to move it. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the rain ease into a mist, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. My duplex wasn't just a building. It was a symbol, a fortress, proof that my voice mattered unless I chose to give it away. And I wasn't about to do that, not now, not ever.